Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be able to introduce Scott Moss. So let me read a little about him, and then I'll be happy to just add to this. Scott has worked in K12 education for 30 years and in higher education for 20 years. He has taught at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. Scott currently works as an instructional technology outreach coordinator at the Los Angeles County Office of Education. He also works part-time as the academic program director of National University's Master of Science in Designing Instructional and Educational Technology. He's a Google certified innovator who has earned the Time Warner National Teacher and the Classroom of the Future Foundation's Innovative Educator Awards. He received his master's in education technology from San Diego State University, and he just finished and earned his PhD at the University of California, Los Angeles, here working with us, doing an amazing study, working with elementary school students, teaching them about algorithmic thinking, algorithmic literacy, incorporating critical media literacy. So I want to turn it over to you, Scott.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen here. There we go. Okay. So, by the way, I do have, if you do want these slides, I do have a bit.ly here, but I can make those available later. Here we go. So, I'm going to talk about something that is being called critical algorithmic literacy. So I'll go through these. I'm not going to actually read the agenda to you. I just want to get started in the interest of time. So a little bit about me, as Jeff said, I've been in education 30 years. That picture all the way to the left is me in the mid to late 80s, working with students with the Apple IIe computers. I've taught middle school, I've taught elementary school, and as Jeff mentioned, in June of this last year, I completed my doctorate in education at UCLA. And a lot of this presentation is based on that work. Excuse me. So what I did, should mention full disclosure, I was excited, thrilled, honored to have both Jeff Scher and Doug Kellner on my dissertation committee. I suppose that's an advantage of going to UCLA. So what I did is I built this, what I'm calling critical algorithmic literacy, not that I made that up, based really as an extension of the critical media literacy framework. Okay, so before I kind of move forward, I just want to, just for a point of clarity, I want to talk about two ways of categorizing AI. Okay, so in the past, gosh, it's been almost a year now, everyone has been very interested and excited and alarmed about generative AI, such as ChatGPT or creation AI. Okay, so that can create things. By the way, this screenshot is an excerpt from a poem. I took the first paragraph of my dissertation and said, turn this into a poem, and it was remarkably good. The poem was good. So that's that. And then the other AI, which is the ones that are really more common to us in our everyday lives, and that are the recommendation engines, the curation AI. And I call it the boring AI that controls most aspects of our lives, such as our credit scores, what entertainment we see, what news we see, where our navigation systems take us, and then also things such as the criminal justice system and policing. And more and more these AIs are making decisions, are replacing humans in the decision-making process. And because the dissertation was planned before generative AI came out, this work was not about generative AI at all, although it will be interesting to see how this work informs work related to generative AI. I do think it will, but I think that remains to be seen here. So this is obvious, I think, that there is a need for students to learn about these algorithmically driven media. They are designed to be addictive. They extract people's data in ways that we don't even imagine, don't realize that they're tracking our movements, even when we're in, stores or out in the world. There's that asymmetric power that they know everything about us, but we know nothing about them, nothing about what they're doing. Naturally, we all know about the misinformation and disinformation that is driven by algorithms. And kind of compounding all of this is a trust in algorithms, and people tend to trust it. Hey, it's math, it's computerized, but it is just like all other media, it's not neutral. And some of the research I did indicated that children trust algorithms and the outputs more than adults do. I don't know if you know this story of this fire safety robot, but it was an experiment where they had this fire safety robot that they showed everybody, hey, this is going to help keep you safe in the event of a fire. And in the demonstration went badly. And it was shown to be kind of a flawed robot. And then they staged a fire. And despite what they'd seen from the robot, and despite it giving seemingly bad advice, people still trusted the robot. So people would, so interesting story. I've got a link there if you want to read more about that. So as I said, as we all know, media are not neutral, including algorithmically driven media. I love this quote from Kate Crawford. And this is talking about algorithms, a self-reinforcing discrimination machine that amplifies social inequities under the guise of technical neutrality. Okay. So another, need for students and all of us to learn about algorithms and AI is that data is now more valuable than oil. If you look at the biggest companies in the world, Facebook and Amazon and Apple, it's all about data. It's all about harvesting our personal data. And, our data is extracted almost every moment of our lives, right? And I like to show this. Now, we all know that if you have Netflix or YouTube, that the recommended videos are based on the videos that you have watched before. What a lot of people don't know is that even the thumbnails that advertise those videos, those are customized based on your preferences. So in this first example, Good Will Hunting, if perhaps you've watched romance movies or romantic comedies, you'll get that image. If you're like me and you like comedy and stand-up comedy, you're more likely to get that image of Robin Williams there. And then these other examples of for the movie Pulp Fiction, which starred both Uma Thurman and John Travolta. If you had watched Uma Thurman movies, that would be the image you see. And if you watch John Travolta movies, then you see the image of John Travolta. So really, these systems are engineered to really kind of almost engineer our attention on a moment-to-moment basis. And this is even more true now than ever. Okay. But we know it's bias and there are flaws in the system. This is from an article from Bloomberg. This is based on the Stable Diffusion text-to-graphics generator. Okay, so it's a technology where you type in a prompt and it creates an image. Right? So what they did is they put in certain roles: architect, lawyer, CEO, cashier, janitor, dishwasher, so on. And you can see by these graphs that they created this how the skin tones varied based on the roles that they put in. So this is maybe an example of those that self-reinforcing biases that come in, because as we're going to see in more detail, AI and these technologies are based on data from the past. So that's why it tends to perpetuate these biases. There we go. So the term critical algorithmic literacy has been used before, but as far as I know, I'm the first one that used that term as an extension of the critical media literacy framework. So really, as an extension of that, looking to expand media literacy to have students engage in the critique of algorithmic practices, but also to develop that sense of agency to produce products that help, to help kind of counter the established power structures. And that media that students can produce could be either in the form of other computer programs or algorithmically driven media, or it could be, podcasts and videos and memes and other types of media. So this framework was important to me. This is from Yasmin Kafai and her colleagues, the computational thinking framing. So I frame critical algorithmic literacy as a synthesis of critical media literacy and computer science. So right now in America, and we're, as far as I know, the only computer science is taken by some people as a high school elective, or some students may get computer science if you have that, very enthusiastic teacher who's into it. But for the most part, you either take computer science or you don't. And if you do learn about computer science in school, it tends to be in the center circle here, the cognitive. So let me back up a second here. So this model separates the way of looking at computer science into the cognitive, which is just kind of learning the nuts and bolts, how to make a program. Situated, which is concentrated on sharing and sharing products with others. And then the critical, which aligns with critical media literacy and critical pedagogy in general. Students who take computer science classes, those classes focused almost exclusively on the cognitive aspect. This is how you're going to get a job in the future. This is how you make a computer program, but with no thought about the context. What are the impacts of these programs that you might create? And that's where the critical frame comes into play. And so this was really useful to me in framing my look at critical algorithmic literacy. So as Jeff mentioned, I did observed a teacher with a 3rd and 4th grade classroom who we co-designed lessons to teach students about computer science so that they could apply it to this media that dominates all of our lives, right? So this is one way that we did it. Just kind of basic computer out, any kind of computer program or computer system works on an input, processing, and output, right? So we start with this analogy of making a cake. Okay, an algorithm's like making a cake, and really focused on how the inputs impact the outputs. So if you have rotten eggs in your cake, you're going to have a bad cake. If you have very good ingredients in your cake, you're more likely to have the output is more likely to be good. Okay, so they can understand the input, processing, and output. And then what we did is try to connect that to their lives. And even most 3rd and 4th graders know a lot about YouTube. They watch YouTube more than TV, most of them. And even the 3rd and 4th graders know that, okay, the recommendations that I see are based on the videos I've watched. I know you probably can't see it on the slide, but that output there is soccer videos. This part of the case study was done during the World Cup last year. So talked about, okay, well, the input is videos you've watched, but what else? And I don't know if you know this, but sometimes your location, things you're shopping for, if you're shopping for a vacation, or if you're in a different location, let's say on a vacation, you might get different videos based on that, not just the videos that you've watched on YouTube. There's all kinds of data that goes into those recommendation engines. So again, trying to connect the basics of computer science with, okay, how does this relate to, my life? Okay. And then moving this over to AI, the input is not just the data set. There's also the input that you would put in, but the data set, and then the learning algorithm, which is the processing, which is invisible to us, right? They say it's in a black box. You can't really see it. You can't really know what's going on. And for current AI, even people who program it don't really know what's going on. You can't look in and say, hey, where was that? And then the prediction or the output, okay? So on the left side here, we have the critical media literacy questions from the critical media literacy framework. And what I did here is I just kind of added some and modified the questions and just talked about some of the things that might be different from other media. And I use the word recommender. It's just a simple kind of generic term for 3rd and 4th graders. So things like, how is a recommender personalized? Okay, so that other media may not, more and more all media are becoming personalized, but just to think about those kinds of things, and what information might have been used, like what data has been gathered to customize that. And oh yeah, it's not in bold, but there's one there that says, how do my interactions with the algorithm affect the recommender? So how do my clicks, my likes, my now scrolling, affect what I see. I don't know if you know about this. I'll take a short bird walk. If any of you do, Instagram or these things where you scroll, and even Facebook does this, is where if you pause to watch a video or watch something, the algorithm instantly detects that, and then the rest of your feed is customized just by, not by clicking like or anything, by just by pausing and spending a little extra time on one image or one video. So as I said earlier, they're kind of engineering every moment of our attention to try to keep it. So here are some examples of how we teach this to little kids. And this is from a website called code.org, which is a really, if you want to learn about computer science, or you want your students to learn about computer science, I highly recommend code.org. And what this is it's an activity on the website where you train this robot to be, its job is to clean up trash in the ocean, okay? So you have a robot, it cleans up trash in the ocean. So we have to train it to differentiate between a fish and trash. So then, and this is just a little video. So you can see the bottom there, it says fish, not fish, and then these are going to go by, and then even little kids, you can say, okay, that's a fish, that's a not fish. And then you, oops. Is that it? No, that's the wrong. Why didn't that go? There we go. So you can see, you just click the buttons, fish, not fish. And then, so you're training the AI, okay, using the training data, right? So you train it, and then after you train it, then you run it. And okay, that's fish. Oh, but look, there's the turtle, there's the starfish. There's those things that were not in the training data. They weren't in the original data set. So because those were not in the original data set, the robot thinks they're trash and is going to treat a starfish and the seahorse and the turtle as if it were trash. So it's a really kind of simple way for students to learn about how training data works and how flaws in the training data, will yield flaws in the system, just like your rotten eggs will yield a bad cake. Okay. I don't know if you all know this quote. I love this quote by Kathy O'Neill. Algorithms are opinions embedded in mathematics. So, we all tend to think of algorithms and Google and everything is it's math, right? And math is, you put in the numbers and you get the same result every time. But it's not objective like that, as we know. So this is another example. I did not do this with the students I've worked with, but it's something that some researchers at MIT used. And there's this program, I don't know if you're all familiar, but there's a little screenshot here. There's a program called Scratch from MIT. And what Scratch is a website. It's a computer program where kids can build their own computer programs. And instead of typing lines of code, they use blocks that look like this, okay? Kind of like, they look like Lego blocks. So it makes, you don't have to worry about, putting the semicolon. If you've ever done that, if you put a parenthesis in the wrong place or a semicolon, it doesn't work. So this takes that part away anyway. So what we have here is these students had access to the data of Scratch users. And Scratch is kind of this social media aspect where you can like something and you can leave comments. So these students were able to mine that data. So these students were tasked with creating a ranking system. So when you go to YouTube or Netflix or anything, or your news or even a Google search, things are ranked. Okay, this is going to be the best. So students were asked, let's make a ranking system for Scratch projects. And this is one student's. So there's a variable here that student called total Scratcher awesomeness. And then they took the variables of Lovitz, likes, plus favorites, plus total views, minus projects, not sure why that's there, plus followers. And so whatever number that yields, that's going to be, the higher the number, the higher the ranking. But if you or I were given this same task, it's likely we would not use the same formula to create a ranking system. In this way, just like creating videos and creating podcasts gives an insight. The production gives insight into the critical aspect. Same here, where you get a little behind the scenes, you get a little interaction with the media, and you can see how it's not objective, basically, how media are not neutral. Okay, here's another activity, and here on the left, and this is kind of that simple block-based coding language here, and this is the original idea was that you were creating a planet and you wanted to only let in good people or keep out the bad people, but you could apply it to school or job or government benefits or anything you want. And if we look at this program, it's a simple if-then statement. So if the person has a criminal record, if it's positive, drop them. Else, keep. Meaning if they don't have a criminal record, we keep them. If they have a criminal record, drop them. So what is that? This is a really good discussion point. It's like, well, is this going to work the way you want? And a lot of issues can come out of a discussion from this, such as, well, what do you mean by criminal record? What if it happened before they're 18? What about a speeding ticket? What about jaywalking? What about, is that criminal record? Okay. And then people, maybe older kids know, if they've learned about how policing and their criminal justice system can be biased based on algorithms and other things, then that might also factor into the conversation. And then the other edge of it is like, oh, just because somebody doesn't have a criminal record, does that mean that we want to admit them to whatever it is? But so these kinds of things help students look at behind the scenes at algorithms and AI and connecting it to real world scenarios. And again, seeing how it's not just kind of a whatever the computer says situation there. Okay, so I did this case study with 3rd and 4th graders in Los Angeles. As I said, I think of it as a synthesis of media literacy and computer science. I'm expanding the idea of critical media literacy to incorporate more computer science, just a little computer science, maybe not that much. And then students describe how the flawed and biased training data can lead to algorithmic bias. And then also taking to that next step and describing what are potential societal impacts, and that aspect was certainly more challenging with 3rd and 4th graders. We don't want to get to, there's a maturity level that we have to consider and all that. I don't know if this is going to, I was just going to show the first 30 seconds. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear this. I don't know if you're all familiar with this, but I'm going to show about 30 seconds or less of this video.
No, I'm not hearing any sound.
Not okay. I'll just summarize it very quickly. Let's see if I can get an image that kind of, oh, this is the wrong video. Anyway, let me just find the image that kind of, yeah. So this person, Joy Bellamine, she was at MIT. She was a doctoral student. There's a picture over here at MIT. And they just had to make a computer program project for one of her classes, and she wanted to make a project where she could look in a mirror and then see somebody that inspires her. That was her project. But she found that their facial recognition algorithms did not recognize her face, because you have to use these existing facial recognition data sets. You don't have your own, right? So she found that it didn't work for her. Until as she writes, kind of half as a joke, she put on this white mask, and then it worked. So she did more research and found that the training data for these facial recognition data sets were mostly used white and Asian men. And then upon research, they found that they were worse at identifying dark-skinned people, and especially dark-skinned women. And her work is actually, she's really done a lot with her work. There's something called the Algorithmic Justice League, and there's a lot of good change based on her work. So And you've probably all heard stories of people being, facial recognition software, having leading people to be falsely arrested and these kinds of things. So another way that you or others or your students can learn about these kinds of algorithms and interact with them is this tool called Google Quick Draw. How are you doing on time? Okay. And Google Quick Draw is, don't even have it up here. Let's see. It's a drawing program. It's a game. It says draw a cookie. Okay. So I'm just do this very quick. So I'm gonna say, and it's trying to guess. I see a circle. I see a moon.
Oh, I know. It's cookie.
Okay. Draw bread. I have no idea. Yeah.
I see meat or circle or moon or potato.
Okay. So what it's doing, it's guessing. It says draw this and then guess. Let me show you something. And then, it'll guess it or not, right? But what you can do here is you have the option to click on the data set of all the different things it asks you about. Okay, there's bread. So I'll know for next time, right? Bread's probably a good one because there's so many ways, okay? So it's showing you the training data. So when it asks me to draw bread, well, that wasn't the good one. It asked me to draw a cookie. I drew the cookie and it guessed it. Now that drawing that I did of the cookie becomes part of the training data. So this is how it learns. And here it says you're looking at the 116,000 drawings that people made to help it identify bread. Hope you can't hear that. So students get kind of a look at some more interaction with training data. And at one time, because there's more training data now, at one time with Google Quick Draw, if you drew if it said draw a shoe, and it drew you drew a shoe, the high heel shoe there, it would not recognize it as a shoe. Why? Because people to that point had not drawn it as a shoe, so it wasn't in its training data. Just like there were fewer dark-skinned people in the facial recognition training data, and so on. So it gives students a chance to really kind of interact with training data and whatnot. So that's another really good activity. And then we try to make these connections, right? So on the top left here, this is for 3rd and 4th graders. We said go to Google Images, search for terms like working man and working woman. In this case, it was CEO. And then you say, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And they say, well, it's all men. It's mostly white men, except for the CEO of Google. It's Google Images, right? So just looking at biases in algorithms that we use every day. You've heard about the racist soap dispensers, the automatic soap dispensers that don't work for darker skinned people. And then you may remember during COVID, the oximeters didn't work as well with darker skinned people, and in a very negative way, where it basically would indicate, okay, you're fine, but maybe you weren't fine, right? So there's a lot of real world examples. Again, with 3rd and 4th graders, it's a little trickier. Another tool, and this is like Google Quick Draw, but it's really another step up, because in this case, instead of just interacting with training data, you are creating your own training data using something called Google Teachable Machine. It's a free tool, and again, I just have kind of an animation here. So you can use images either through a webcam or uploaded, sounds or movements, and have it differentiate. So in this case, this student is training the AI to differentiate the picture of her with the stuffed animal and without the stuffed animal. Okay, I'm gonna have to do this a few times. So here you can see she took pictures of herself without the stuffed animal, pictures of her with a stuffed animal, and then you click training, takes a few seconds. And then when you run it, just like we ran the Oceans for AI, it gives you a percentage of how confident it is that I'll run it again. If it's a picture of the her with the dog or without the dog, you can see it's pretty accurate there. I do this, I really like this tool, and I do this activity with students where I teach it to differentiate. Let's see if this will show up on the camera here. There it is. I hold it in front of my body there. A pear and an apple. And actually, I like this activity so much, I bought fake fruit. So you do that. You take a bunch, a lot of pictures of the pear, a lot of pictures of the apple, test it and say, okay, well, it's doing a really good job of telling the difference between an apple and a pear. But then you bring in the green apple. Okay. What happens when you bring in the green apple? It thinks it's a pear. So that's a discussion. How come it didn't know it was an apple? And well, because it's basing its decision on color and not shape, for example. But these, again, giving students that opportunity to interact with AI training data and kind of see where it goes wrong. Okay. And again, impacts depending on the age of your learners. Almost all aspects of life, if you think about it, as far as hiring. In our case study, what we did is we focused on that story from a few years ago where somebody, not Amazon, found that their hiring algorithm was biased against women. Again, it was based on prior data. And even though they didn't have the gender per se in the screening process, if part of the resume included words like women's volleyball team or the word woman in there anywhere, because those words were not in its past data, made it less likely to hire women. So but there are all kinds of examples of that. I just learned yesterday that as far as the healthcare goes, that the kidney recipients lists are also based, the decisions are based on AI. So there's so many aspects of life, and you can kind of go through and just think about different areas of life and think about, is AI making decisions in that area, and if they're flawed or not. And there's a case here, I think under government benefits, I think it was in the Netherlands, where they had an AI that determined who was guilty or suspected of welfare fraud, and they were single mothers who didn't speak Dutch, and so that they got rid of that after a time. But in the meanwhile, many people were denied benefits. So it's important to connect these algorithmic biases to real world examples, so it's not abstract like that. And things like sentencing. So, and in this program, we didn't have as much time as I would have liked to do the production aspect of the lessons. But students were tasked with creating an idea for an app, and it could be anything. And then they would also, the third and fourth graders would also describe how those programs would avoid the algorithmic bias that they had learned about. So in these examples, the one on the left is a student who created a kind of an online counselor or online therapist. And she talked about how, yes, I'd have to have every solution and every problem, and just talked about the massive data sets. Similarly, the one on the right here was an animal to human translator. And that was cute because he said, yeah, I'd have to have every animal sound. And then the student paused and said, that's going to be a lot. It's like, yeah, that's going to be a lot. But it's important to know that in the real world, these data sets that AI uses are tremendous, especially with the generative AI, right? But all of them now, really. So again, getting students thinking about how, giving them some idea of agency there. Again, I wish we would have had more time for them to create more than just come up with these ideas and sketches, but that's what we did. So I can't see the chat, but I see a few things are there, but I want to give time for some some questions, if there are any.
Great. Well, let's do that. We have just about 13 minutes. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask based on what you've been listening to and seeing? Well, maybe I'll get us started,
Okay.
because I'm very curious about some things. It seems like a lot of what you're talking about is predictions, right? The way AI, basically we build these machines to be able to make a prediction about what's going to happen next. And that seems so much connected to kind of surveillance capitalism, the whole idea that Google and Facebook are just scraping, taking all our data with the purpose of trying to get to know us better than we know ourselves. And then they claim they can predict what we'll do better than we can predict it. And the whole purpose of that is to modify our behavior, right? To get us to either buy or vote or do something that they want. So it seems like what you're doing here, getting kids to kind of play with data sets to start to see these decisions and the role and the importance of what you choose and what you don't choose, because every choice leaves everything else out, how much that influences the bias and the quality of what the machine will be able to do. I'm curious, what do you think the elementary school students you were working with took away from this in terms of kind of understanding these big ideas?
I think they do understand that I think with the Google search activities and whatnot, that they do understand that I think they have a better understanding that things like Google search are not objective and there are biases in the media. And, it's my hope that they see things a little more critically. And I also hope that they have, even though, again, we didn't have much time for the production part, is that they at least understand that they do have some potential for agency in this area, that they can create media that maybe counteracts some of these biases and some of these messages.
Great. Thank you. Who else? Any other questions, thoughts, or comments that you'd just like to share or ask? Feel free to either type in the chat or just unmute and speak up. We still have a little time, so we're happy to kind of have a little bit of a discussion.
Oh, thank you. Great. Yeah. You're just interrupt me if you think of a question, but here are some of the recommended books. In this fourth one here, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, is a woman who's an AI specialist who says a great way to learn about AI is to see where it goes wrong. And what she does in this book and on her website, which I think is called Weird AI, she shows some of the AI outputs before they're done, as it's, because they're learning, right? So on the way to learning, so the phrase "you look like a thing and I love you" they were trying to train an AI to learn pickup lines, and before it got them better, this was one of the pickup lines. But if you go to Janelle Shane is her name, her TED Talk, it's interesting and very just kind of fun and lighthearted way of kind of looking at these mistakes, because for some people I think this is it's very serious stuff when you talk about unfair prison sentencing and unfair police practices and health consequences. It's very serious, so it's nice to also have the option of doing something, of learning about these biases or the errors in a way that's not quite so serious.
So that makes me think of Naomi Oreskes' work. I'll drop a link in here to a TED Talk she did, where her goal was to get people, she's a science historian, and to get people to think about, when should we trust science? Why should we trust science? And she tells that story and she teaches that through the mistakes. So looking at when were the times that science got it wrong, like with eugenics and in different places in time when our scientists, told us things that now today we know are inaccurate. But she uses this as a wonderful tool or strategy to help people think more critically about, so how do I know when today I should trust science? And she gets at, deeper ideas about, the issues of consensus, the issues of diversity, of multiple methods, things like that, which are really key. I think what you're sharing here is a great example. If students can see when algorithms screw up and do it wrong, that those are great opportunities for us to learn from them and to see just how fallible they can be and that they're not objective. Because when we think that algorithms are just, objective proof and evidence, we're not going to question them. And, they're going to just continue reproducing these biases that we have in society.
Right. And that reminds me of something from the book Atlas of AI that's displayed on that page, where the author talks about, I forget the name of the science, but they took skulls and they would see how much lead, basically how big the brain cavity was. And they had this science that's saying, these certain races or these certain groups have smaller space for the brain, therefore they're not as smart there. And it was used to justify and perpetuate all kinds of terrible things. And I think that was accepted science for a very long time. And what she does also in that part of the book is she connects that to, I talked about bias, we talk about bias, but just the power of categorization. Because that's what these things do, they categorize. So when you have the power to make the categories and decide who goes in what category, in many ways, that's kind of the ultimate power. So and it can important roles of algorithms, kind of even bigger picture than simply bias.
So that's fascinating, because the power of categorization also could be looked at it as colonialism. When the colonists went around the world, in the 500 years ago, Columbus and those folks, one of the things they were doing, they were naming and categorizing people and things and places. And so thereby the stereotypes and all these divisions between races and hierarchies of who is human and who isn't, were starting to take over. And so it's, again, like you're saying, that power of being able to name and categorize. That's fascinating.
And you could connect it to psychology, because we all have these kind of cognitive shortcuts, and we may not think of it consciously, but we do tend to categorize almost everything. That's a food, that's not, or whatever it happens to be. So
especially with the term normal, that's normal, that's not. That's a way, where we definitely marginalize people with this false assumption that there is such a thing as a normality, when there's really, it's more about diversity that we should be recognizing.
Excellent.
Anybody else? We just have a couple minutes left. Happy to just hear any thoughts or comments anyone has. Okay. Well, this has been terrific. It's always such a great opportunity hearing your work, because it really gets me thinking about, like, how can I incorporate this? Because I don't. I mean, I feel so technologically illiterate, especially when it comes to AI and algorithms. But you really kind of break it down very nicely into kind of looking at the notion of what you're just saying, categories, naming, data sets, and the way, you put bad eggs into a cake, you're going to end up with a bad cake. I mean, that's the simplicity of this, that I think the more we can kind of break it down like that, even for our adults, my students at the university, I think it makes it more accessible to understand kind of the big picture here.
That's true. And when you talk about learning computer science, some people just hear the word algorithm, they hear the words computer science, and it scares them. And that's too hard, that's math, and they put up a barrier to it. And if we can make it so this is very approachable, and then also the tools like Google Quick Draw and other things that are very simple and understandable, help kind of break down that resistance as well.
Cool. So we have a couple minutes. I'm just wondering, Cobra, have you been able to bring in any kind of algorithmic questions with your work?
Actually not. It's just my research is just evaluation of that teacher training, but this was so interesting because I also evaluating a teacher training for kindergarten teachers.
Mhm.
And it was so interesting for me because they use a lot of the B-bot. Have you ever heard that one? And I didn't see they teach biases in that algorithm. And also I have that question, how can you teach kids bias of algorithm? And this was so interesting for me. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, they use a lot of this technology in the kindergarten here. But I didn't see they teach that bias to the to kids.
Yeah. I wonder, it'd be interesting to see how you do that. B-bots are they're like a
Another
plastic
technology
ball.
there is, I forget the
It's
name.
like a little robot that students can move and you could have it go
Yeah.
through days or but it's they're programming a robot, but that would be interesting to see what bias, it might be interesting. I don't know if B-bot has it, but other things with the speech recognition, that it recognizes, this person's voice and not that person's voice, and why, and that might be one way to come at it too.
Yeah, they use a lot of this technology in this kindergarten, but they don't talk about the biases.
Yeah, I mean, not many people are yet. And
Yeah, it is art. I think it is not easy to teach kids that bias of algorithm, and that's why that's your work is so interesting for me, because I also have problem how we can teach kids the bias of the algorithm in very simple way.
At some schools, certainly in other parts of the country, they're very concerned about appearing political, although it's all political, right? But they're worried about getting it. So the Google image search or some of these other things where it's like, hey, these, they're mostly white. Some, that might frighten some teachers or make them nervous about, delving into something that could be perceived as controversial.
Here they don't have problem that much about teaching, for example, political representation or gender and different upper school and even bias. They don't have that much problem to teach this one in the school and kindergarten. They have such a freedom, but problem is that they don't, and they don't know maybe, and maybe they don't care. I don't know.
And that's in Vienna, is that correct?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. There's so much work for us to do. And it's exciting knowing that there are ways to do it, to break it down and make it concrete and accessible. But it takes work, and people need to learn about this.
Yeah. This is one problem. The teacher even don't know about that one.
Right.
Right.
When they don't know, they cannot teach.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And,
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Scott, really appreciate this.
thank you. It's my pleasure.
And
Thank you.
we'll go ahead and we'll close down and we'll get ready for the next session.
Okay.